stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day.
I always think of the Newseum as the home of freedom.
I don't know where this nation would be. I don't know where I would be today without the guarantees of the First Amendment.
There's a war against information. There's a battle over who controls information.
What a democracy should do when there's a collision of values is talk about it.
Engage in the news, be a citizen of the world, give a damn.
We must come to see, with one of our distinguished jurists, that justice too long delayed is justice denied.
Religion and our beliefs are part of people's core identities.
Very interesting to feel that you are protected by law and you have support to pursue your life freely.
Good evening, and welcome to the Newseum's Night Conference Center. My name is Jeff Herbst. I'm CEO and President of the Newseum. Tonight we present the first in a series of programs exploring how virtual and augmented reality are transforming the way information and news are conveyed and consumed, and how important stories are told. The Newseum, of course, is dedicated to free expression and the 5 freedoms of the First Amendment, with a strong focus on the intersection of media, technology, and freedom. With the launch of this new series, the Newseum offers a major platform in the nation's capital for a comprehensive, multi-year exploration of virtual reality technologies and stories, staying in front as the medium evolves. The promises and challenges of virtual reality are connected to the Newseum's focus on how the rapid evolution of media technologies will affect the media and eventually our notions of an informed citizenry and our democracy. Tonight, many of you have already experienced some of these evolving technologies and the innovative content. Now we'll hear from some of the content producers and others involved in this emerging field. As VR content moves onto mobile devices and cost-effective headsets at an increasing pace, journalists and news producers, from whom you'll hear from tonight, will be in greater demand for new forms of immersive storytelling. I'd like to thank the co-sponsors of tonight's program, the Producers Guild of America, DCAAF, and Capital Commentator. We also appreciate all of your support and coming out tonight. I'd also like to express a special thanks to Mitch Gelman, who will be joining the Newseum in a few days as a visiting senior fellow in media and technology. Mitch will be at the Newseum for a few months, helping us explore these new technologies. Let me now turn it over to Chris Paff. Chris is president of Chris Paff Tech Media LLC and vice chairman of the Producers Guild of North America's New Media Council. Chris.
Thanks, Jeff. And thank you for coming out. I know it's a rainy night in DC, but if you're interested in VR, you're interested in the news, you want to know what is happening and where it's going, this is the place to be. And I can't thank Jeff and John Maynard and Kathy Trost and also Scott Williams and the whole staff here, Jake, everybody has just put together an incredible event, which really took not much time, a few weeks. I want to give them a round of applause before we get just a little background. So I met Jeff at an event at South by Southwest in Austin last month. How many people here were at South by Southwest? Okay, that's pretty good. The Knight Foundation, and of course Mitch is part of that organization, has a journalism program. One of my dear colleagues in the Producers Guild, Shazna Nessa, is involved in that program. She was on a panel that I produced and moderated in New York for the Producers Guild in February. So I go to this event, and it really, is just the who's who of journalism. Some people I knew, some I'd heard of, and it was just fascinating. It was great roundtables. So I said to Jeff and Scott, I said, hey, we've got an active chapter of the Producers Guild in DC. Let's do an event with people we know. Let's bring it together. Let's make it happen. So let's put on a show, which we did. And thank you. We can't have a show without an audience. So some of you know everyone here. Of course, Mitch is now a fellow, so he's super esteemed. Mitch Gelman with the Knight Foundation. Of course, Cam Blake, Washington Post. Ray Santos with Gannett Digital. And of course, Paul Chung with AP. And this man who just came in, Rob Palovic, is Ray's other better half. So I don't know, Paul, they may want to sit next to each other.
I'll keep it
so,
separated.
yeah, okay, we'll keep it. That's good. So what we're going to do is we're going to have some show and tell. My mantra is please show us, don't tell us. Each of the panelists is going to show some of their work, and then we're going to have a very lively panel discussion. And, of course, we will take your questions. And if you haven't noticed, on either side of the house, up front here in, I guess it's row 3, we have standing mics to take your questions. So we're going in order from left to right here from the house. Mitch Gelman with the Knight Foundation, and now soon to be a fellow here at the Newseum. Mitch?
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you all for coming out on a rainy afternoon or evening. I'm humbled to be here and to get to share some observations about this evolving media with all of you. I'm humbled because most of you in the audience, many of you in the audience, are technologists, storytellers, people who have worked in emerging technologies in the past and currently, and many of whom are very familiar with what we're doing here. So people like Royce Martin, Eugene Evans, others who I'm just meeting today, bear with me as I try to set a context for how in the last 2 years this medium has moved so quickly and given us the opportunity to talk about it this evening. A few months ago, we released a report at the Knight Foundation. The report looked at the flurry of activity in news around virtual reality storytelling. The New York Times last November released 1.3 million cardboard headsets in its newspaper for all of its Sunday subscribers and delivered an application with a series of stories about refugees displaced in new environments. The Gannett organization and the USA Network was recognized by the National Press Foundation with its first Best Use of Technology in Journalism Award for storytelling that the Des Moines Register had done, bringing people through a VR experience into a 6th-generation farm, meeting the family and addressing the challenges that they faced. And then live streaming in 360-degree spherical video the presidential speeches during the Iowa caucus campaign from the state fair in Iowa. I'm joined on this panel today by Ray Soto and Robert Patovic, my colleagues from USA Today and the Des Moines Register. Ray developed the design for the farm experience, Harvest of Change, and Robert led the team that created the technology that enabled us to be the first news organization to live stream at cost from a public event. Knight Foundation gave a $500,000 grant to Frontline in the Emblematic Group to continue to develop stories in VR. And now it's my honor and pleasure to get to work with Kathy Trost and Scott Williams, John and Jeff Herbst to bring a VR installation to the Newseum, which we're hopeful you will be able to come back and enjoy later this year. The Knight Foundation report, Viewing the Future, with a question mark, Virtual Reality in Journalism, is available to anybody who wants to take a look at it at knightfoundation.org. It's a comprehensive overview based on a series of questionnaire responses from 10 different news organizations that have worked in this medium over the past year and a half. It includes a timeline. It also captures the investment in the technology and in the storytelling, looks at some of the work that Cameron and others have done at the Washington Post and elsewhere. The thing that makes this report so fascinating to me is that everybody here tonight, if you sit down and literally take 45 minutes to read through these pages, you are now an expert in this medium. It is so new, it is so fresh, it is so immature, and has such great potential that you will catch up to essentially what any of us know simply by reading this report and realizing that nobody is an expert. The report looks at the promise and the potential of the medium, the incredible storytelling, the power of that storytelling to connect audiences with characters and issues and ideas in places that creates greater empathy. A growing market overall, the power of the emerging technology and the speed with which the technology is emerging. Just in the last 10 minutes, I've heard these guys who have been working with these cameras now for months talking about 2 cameras that they haven't had a chance to work with yet because they were just released last week. Finally, there are ad and sponsorship ideas that could create the possibility of the type of monetization that is going to enable us to sustain this storytelling and reinvigorate a new generation to engage with news and information in ways that we haven't seen in decades. Every single one of these promises comes with an equal and opposite challenge. We need to understand the new narrative structure that's going to enable us to tell these stories. We need to answer the ethical questions that come up with creating a spherical environment in which everything is in the frame at all times. The adoption potential of these headsets remains uncharted. The production cost, even as the cost of the cameras and the post-production stitching is easier and comes down, are still very high and in many cases prohibitive for smaller news organizations to tackle on their own. And while the ad sponsorship opportunities exist to support the content that the producers are creating, it also gives brands a chance to go direct to consumer in ways that have never existed before. The investment is significant. And when we're looking at this market and asking, is it really going to live up to the hype, or is it going to fall and collapse in the way that 3D television and other new technologies have in recent years, we have to look at the investment. There's been more than $4 billion over the last 5 years that have gone into the hardware, the real-world applications, the education, and the gaming. More than 229 new investors came in 2015, which was a 27% increase from the investors that were putting money into this market in 2014. This is already on pace to exceed that through the first quarter, the first half of the current year. So the money is there. The technology companies from Facebook, from Google, from Magic Leap, HTC, Samsung, Apple starting to get into the game, Nokia, believe that this is not simply another way to view content, but it is in and of itself the dawn of a new medium that allows us to tell stories and connect with audiences in new ways. The headsets are evolving quickly. In this room, some of you had a chance to look at the various levels of VR. VR is many things. It can be viewed on a cardboard, through an application on the phones that all of you have in your pocket. It can be viewed in a spherical environment, in a Samsung media ecosystem, on Samsung Galaxy Note phones, in a Gear VR device. And there's a few Gear VR in the back if any of you want to try those out. Much better resolution and greater array of content in the Gear VR, which is a partnership between Oculus and Samsung. It is a $99 upsell to a Samsung phone. So you see the price coming down. Oculus Rift coming out this year. The HTC Vive, which is the room scale walk-around experience that some of you had a chance to demo earlier this evening, released this month. And PlayStation and Sony are coming out with their device supposedly by the end of this year. What's fascinating about that is while you need computers on your own to run the Rift and to run the Vive, Sony already has an install base of 37 million PlayStations around the world in many of our living rooms, and you're not going to need anything but a modest headset in order to take advantage of the content they're going to be offering. The same time that the headsets are evolving for the viewing, the cameras are evolving to make the production easier. And we have with us tonight Robert Padovic, who has as much, if not more, experience than anybody in this industry in terms of shooting in spherical video, producing in spherical video, and delivering the highest of the high-end content that many of you have a chance to see today. Robert has used the GoPro Array. This is a 6-camera version that can give you spherical video that when you finish requires you to do what our eyes do, which is we see two different versions, left eye, right eye. Our brain stitches it together for us automatically. There's no brain in the GoPro Array, so you need to use a stitching software in post-production to stitch the 6 views into a spherical video. This little tiny camera, and there's one in the back, I think Ray might even have one in his pocket, or right there in front of him, is called a Ricoh Theta S. This came out in December, and it's smaller than a television remote. It shoots high-quality 360-degree stills and small screen quality spherical video, $350, fits in your pocket, and auto stitches itself with no post-production. On the other end is Nokia's Ozo. This is a $60,000 cinematic quality camera with 8 cameras on it and 8 different audio receptors. So Bud O'Connor, who's here with the Newseum, has seen this and explored it. Eugene Evans, who is here, has looked at the audio potential of it. One of the key pieces of this device from a camera standpoint is it shoots stereoscopic video. Begins to build in the 3-dimensional sense that more of these cameras will provide in the future, and with the audio that it captures, enables you to produce directional sound. So you can use the sound to cue where you want people to look as they're going through the experience. 2 weeks ago at F8, Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook announced that they're releasing their own camera. This includes 17 different lenses and a stitching software in the cloud that comes with the camera that will enable you to stitch more easily and produce more efficiently. Facebook 360 and YouTube 360 are competing now to be the place where people in the mass market go to upload their spherical video. $4+ billion, estimates that this could be a multi-billion-dollar market on the hardware, the content, the entertainment, the medical research, the manufacturing and tourism industry in the future. A lot of money, but the technologists and the manufacturers and the investors' greatest fear is bad content. They're afraid that once the novelty wears off, people aren't going to have any reason to come back. The best answer for bad content is quality content. In order to focus on quality content for this audience, and we have with us some people who have done incredible work in the content space, what quality content for spherical video and storytelling in VR comes down to are two criteria. One, is this a story that is enhanced by giving you the sense of presence? Chris talked about showing and not telling. We'd all had editors earlier in our careers. I was a newspaper reporter who would tell us, show, don't tell. Details, details, details. Does this media give you the chance to create a greater sense of presence, and does that sense of presence enhance the story that you're going to tell? If so, then you ask yourself, what about perspective? Can we provide a perspective in this story? Is it something that is going to preserve a memory or allow us to see an angle that is going to be unique to the way I'm absorbing and experiencing this story? If so, it moves us beyond a traditional narrative into a nonlinear story technique and device for storytelling, which may be unfamiliar to many of us who are used to a beginning and a middle of an end, but to an entire generation that's growing up on Minecraft and Clash of Clans and Call of Duty, they are used to a nonlinear experience and assembling bits and pieces of fact that they have an influence over to come to a greater truth that's meaningful to them. So perspective and presence, if those are two things that are enhanced as you try to tell the story in this new medium, it can lead you to the type of experiential storytelling that can bring you to the Mars, take you into the skies, to the Malecon in Cuba, into the savannah. The Washington Post, Cameron's work, brought you into the Oval Office, onto the mountainside, under the sea, for those of you who watched Blue. Robert produced an amazing piece of video with Ashley Greene, an actress getting ready for the Oscars earlier this year. NBC took us to North Korea frontline, up front and center to the Ebola virus, and Nani de la Peña and others at Emblematic Group into Aleppo and Syria in a way that we couldn't before. One example of this work is a story that Verse did, and do we have people here who worked on this project? There are some folks that have worked with Verse here and have been involved in some of their storytelling. Jake, can we quickly go and give people a sense of the spherical power of this story? It's about a woman who is an Ebola survivor who went back into the community to help others recover from the disease.
Dear Lord, thank you for your healing grace. Help me to do the work you have purposed me to do. I'm trying, Lord. We are all trying. Please, heal this land. Close these deep wounds. By your grace, things are getting better. It is starting to resemble the old Liberia again. The markets are reopening.
So what we're able to do here is not simply bring the news to you, but to bring you into the news. That's Jake, who's simply navigating around the spherical video. because of the aspects that catch his eye and he wants to focus on in that story. It is still undecided and undetermined and anybody's guess as to whether or not this new medium will become the new front porch. Obviously, the front porch used to be the front porch, where you could sit down with a newspaper and glass of tea and read the paper. That front porch moved into the living room, where we gathered around the television set, then to our phones, and now into our consoles and our headsets. As the media and the technology continues to emerge and to evolve, we see people gathering for different types of experience. At this point, because we can't predict where it's going to go, a lot depends upon how you in this room and my colleagues here are going to succeed in telling great stories that are going to draw people into this medium. But since we can't predict the future, we look at the benchmarks. 2016 is a year for benchmarking the growth. How much journalism and storytelling is being produced in this medium? How many applications are being launched or how much content is being distributed through the consolidated applications that are appearing? What about the distribution of headsets? In 2014, Google distributed 500,000 cardboard viewers. Last year, they distributed 5 million cardboard viewers, and now we have the gear and the other devices coming on the market. And what is the spend going to be by advertisers and brands? So as we look forward, we will now this year have some basis to understand what measures of success will define this storytelling as we move forward. Thank you for your time. Chris, pass it on to the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Mitch. Quite an overview, and again, go to knightfoundation.org, get this report. Do it before you leave if you can. Cam Blake, again, has been doing amazing work with the Washington Post. Cam, what do you got to show us?
All right. Well, Cam Blake, I'm Cam Blake with the Washington Post, and I am here to show you our first virtual reality experience that we had produced and we have published. And basically, we started with a great story. Like Mitch was saying, we wanted to take you somewhere that you couldn't go, somewhere that you've never been, somewhere that is hard to go. Our first unpublished piece was the Oval Office. As a reporter at the Washington Post, I have never been in the Oval Office. I know there's people there that have been there a lot longer than I have that report for the White House that haven't been in the Oval Office. So, you know, taking people places they can't go, that's exactly what I think VR is used for and is a great use of the technology. So another aspect of the story was just sort of how to get you involved in this journey to Mars. You know, it's Star Trek, it's outer space. We wanted to bring it back home and kind of talk about what was really going on in the world with Mars. And so when you go to thewashingtonpost.com and check out our story, we talk to you about the need for space exploration, the need for mankind to kind of branch out from Earth, and also the space race and space exploration was huge in the 60s and 70s, and it is just something that has fallen to the wayside in the latest of years. So we wanted to give you an experience going somewhere that no one has gone and isn't going to be able to go for a very long time. We partnered with the University of Texas as well in Austin to do this. And we came across a lot of interesting things, a lot of interesting problems, and a few facts that Mitch was bringing up. When we first built this, we wanted it for the headsets. We wanted it to look gorgeous. We wanted it to be just for the Oculus, just for the HTC. You were going to need the most powerful computer possible to run this experience, and we were going to make it almost real that you were there, you know, virtual real. That became sort of an issue because not everybody has the amount of money to invest into the computer. They don't also necessarily have the amount of money to invest into the headsets. So how can we get this virtual reality content to the most users possible? And so that's when Cardboard and that's when Gear VR come in. But when you're building the content, those are different executions and different deployments that you have to make. So our first experience we built, our first iteration was just for the headsets, was desktop. You needed to have a really great graphics card, work works with an Xbox controller, and it works with your Oculus. And as long as you have all of those boxes checked, you can experience the Mars journey that way. What we did later on, after we built this experience, was to come up with a way for you to view this on your mobile device, which is a more cardboard fashion. And so as the content creator, we have to think about the delivery and the deliverables and who is actually able to ingest and digest this information. So the cardboard experience is a little bit different. It's a little bit pared down because you don't have that great of a graphics card on your phone. You don't have that much memory. You're not going to wait for gigs of information to download when you're on the train. You don't have the time, and you want to see this experience. So we had to build this in two different fashions, and one was for the desktop and one was for mobile devices. And we used a WebGL feature, WebJS feature to build this. Also, Mitch was talking about sort of advertisers, and the reason I'm staying on this slide for a moment is we wanted to talk about advertisers and sort of monetizing projects. And so in this, we have white markers. The white markers are actual data points from the Washington Post that sort of give you more insight and more depth into Mars and the experience, what we're trying to accomplish, what it's going to take to get there, how long it's going to take there, and just all the facts that you want to hear. The blue markers that you see that are off in the distance are advertisers. This project was sponsored in part by Amazon Web Services and Intel, and they wanted to provide the information about products and services that they offer inside of the experience to the user while you're using it. Those products and experiences were actual web and internet services, so I feel like it was the right place and definitely the right advertisements to have inside of the experience. Jake, if we could do the Mars video. So the difference, there are a few differences too between the 360 video that New York Times has released or a 360 video that any content producer releases, is that it's a video and you're in a fixed location and everything that's happened around you has already happened and it's been either staged or recorded. In VR, traditional and true VR, you are allowed to move through the space, as you can kind of see our demonstration right now. You can move through the space, you interact with these points, and Jake will go ahead and do the store assets video now as well. You interact through the space. You get to walk through and choose the location and the markers and the interactions that you want to have. And again, another point and fact that Mitch brought up is that it's non-linear. One of the things that we always wanted to figure out was where the user was going to go first. We thought that we could put an order to the data points in the infographics, and you really couldn't do that because we had no idea where you were going to go in the beginning. So non-linear storytelling, that's something that, again, as a traditional journalist that's used to having a story that's beginning, middle, and end, is something that you have to digest. It's something that is a reality, and it is just not going to work like it did in the past on this platform and in this device. And not yet, not yet. I'm sure we can sort of push people in the direction that we want them to go. So another thing, and you might not see this in here, is just seeing the path that the user walks on and the interactions they already had. You don't want to go over the same interaction twice. You don't want to keep ingesting the same content. You should kind of have an idea of where you've been so that you don't waste any time and you get all of the facts and all of the information that is provided inside of the experience. So those were some of the problems that we faced, and those were all of the problems that we solved in building this experience. For the future of the Washington Post and the future of storytelling in the news, it came down to sort of turnaround time as well. So telling these stories and being able to produce content like this in a timely fashion for a breaking news event is something that we would like to do. And I think that is one of the hurdles that we hadn't solved yet, but we should in the future with the technology. And with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and pass it down to Ray. So.
Thank you, Cam. That was great. So I think Ray and Rob may be doing a tag team now, representing Gannett Digital, USA Today. So this is the Rob and Ray show.
I'm going to change the water too.
With Paul moving. Stage left. There we go. Excellent. All right, Ray, you're up.
All right, so I guess I'll get this started off. So yeah, my name is Ray Soto, the creative lead of Applied Technologies at Gannett. Here's Robert Padovic, director of VR production and editorial. So we're here today to talk about where the USA Today Network has been and where it's going. Before I get started, I'm sure some of you might be wondering what exactly is a creative lead and what is a former video game developer doing within the journalism industry. So my role within Gannett is to drive the creative opportunities and vision for VR across both the editorial and product development teams. I guess you could say I'm a hybrid of an engineer, an artist, but ultimately I'm a digital storyteller. So when you think about it, video games developers have been telling interactive stories for decades. So why not work with some of the best storytellers in the industry, which are journalists? Journalists understand their communities. They understand what matters to them, both from a local, national levels, at least in our perspective. So I feel almost as if that's, when you combine both of them, it leads to great opportunities. It's kind of the, with our powers combined, it's not like in a Saturday morning cartoon where we kind of pound our fists and we're defeating a monster, but when you think about it, it's the storytelling, the creative visual side of things, and at the same time being able to drive a narrative and create something that makes the user feel as if they're actually immersed within a story. But what is virtual reality? It's one of the toughest questions that there is to answer, but since this is kind of, we're talking about an immersive platform, I'm going to throw out a question to all of you. By a show of hands, how many of you have tried virtual reality? It's much more than I thought there would be. That's great. All right, so let me ask you, just throw out the first word you think of when someone asks you, what is VR? Surrounded. Anything else? Immersive. There we go. So there really is no wrong answer. When you think about it, you can throw around all these buzzwords. You can throw around, there's immersive. You can throw around presence. For me, my personal favorite is awesome. But when you think about it, it's almost like you're trying to describe to someone who's never experienced it before, what is the color blue and what does an orange taste like? So I was trying to think, what is the best way that I can describe what VR is? When you think about it, each of you are within an immersive experience right now. And unlike this slide, you haven't taken the red pill from the Matrix, but think about this. No one is framing what you see in a box right now. If you look to your left and you look to your right, you're seated next to other folks. Each of you are seated with a different place within this room, but you're watching the same presentation. And I guarantee you, each of you will walk out of here with a different experience. And that's the power of virtual reality. It's personal. When you think about where you are and where you're looking at within an immersive experience, you're going to walk away with something different. So the reality of our virtual reality journey. At the USA Today Network, we started 2 years ago. When they had reached out to me with a simple phone call, Gannett had called and asked, hey, are you interested in coming in? We'd like to talk to you about building a VR experience. And to be completely transparent, I had no idea who Gannett was at the time. So I remember walking up and I saw these two massive glass buildings, and I had made the comment earlier, but I remember laughing to myself thinking, oh, Tony Stark must work there. So walking in, I remember leaving there with inspired. When we were talking about the power of this medium and how we could start early and try something that no one's ever tried before, and I wanted to be a part of that. But at the time, we didn't necessarily know how to do it. We understood the technology, but we were kind of waiting for technology to catch up to our needs. We were looking for better camera solutions. We were looking for better processing powers, and on from there. So unlike Sam and Frodo in The Lord of the Rings, we were ready to leave our comfort zone, but no one died. we had a lot of late nights, lots of coffee, lots of pizza. What I'm getting at is, we had our industry first, the harvest of change. We had started 2 years ago. It took us about 2 months to develop. But what we had done was we were telling a local story to a national audience via a virtual reality headset, the Oculus Rift, an industry first. We were spending weeks recreating the virtual environment. Robert and his team were out, shooting content, stitching it together. Then we had to figure out a way to bring the two together into a game engine. It's pretty ambitious. We weren't too sure if it was going to work, but we wanted to give it a shot. And fortunately, after weeks and weeks of putting this together and giving it, seeing what we could develop, we finally had it. And as Mitch had mentioned before, we ended up winning 2 awards, which is pretty humbling as a former video game developer new to a journalism industry. The Edward R. Murrow and the National Press Foundation for Best Use of Technology in Journalism. So for me, this is a very exciting medium to work in, especially within this industry. I love storytelling, so why not work, as I mentioned before, with journalists? We could do great things, and with that, I'm going to pass this over to Robert so he can kind of speak to what it is that we're trying to do as a network.
Thanks, Ray. And yeah, for me, as a producer, a journalist, a storyteller, having the chance to work with guys like Ray, who I'm pretty sure is an actual wizard. It's a really great, rare opportunity. And as Ray mentioned, Mitch led us on this path a couple years ago to experiment, figure out how the heck you fuse all of these elements together in these emerging mediums into a cohesive experience. But we always knew, we think we always knew, that VR is not a flash in the pan. It is a new content medium, that it is a new option to tell stories right alongside video, text, photo, whatever. So we knew all that experimentation was leading on a road toward eventually empowering the USA Today network to be able to produce VR at the local and national level. We've touched on tiers of experiences and tiers of applications. That's really been our approach at the network, to be able to give our journalists the tools in the toolbox to say, here's our story mix for the week, here's what's coming up. This story would be a great video, this story would be a great feature on Sunday. This story would make for an awesome VR segment or feature or interactive or whatever. Whether it's something quick or hit, just a 360 photo or two, or whether it's something that we think has enough meat on the bones to pull a team together, Ray and his team and journalists from around the network to put something together much more substantive. We just want to have VR as a tool in that toolbox, as a possibility. Which button is it? Green one. Sorry. The perils of showing up late from deadline. We all know what that's like. Regardless of what it is, it's a new way to connect audiences to stories. So these screen grabs sort of represent that. A feature such as Cuba, a visual experience such as riding with the Blue Angels, a sports feature told in multiple parts with the Cincinnati Enquirer following the Reds through spring training. All of these, as we've said, are experiences that audiences, most people would not have the chance to experience, but we're able to put these experiences together for them. And it leads to opportunities like this, as I touched on. Our goal is to have gear in all of our newsrooms, have workflows established, have the tools in the toolboxes there. We had an opportunity, a great director of ours based in Atlanta saw that the Blue Angels were coming to town. He said, wow, that would be awesome to ride in the cockpit of a Blue Angels jet in VR. A gazillion GoPro videos have been done in these things, but it was an opportunity to get a 360 camera in there. So he had the gear, he had the workflows, and he had the knowledge base. So he contacted Blue Angels, said, we want to get a camera in a cockpit. They liked the idea. Fast forward a couple steps, we put the video out. A minor player on Facebook named Mark Zuckerberg noticed it, said, that's amazing, that's why we created 360 video, and he wanted to share it again. So it was just a really good flash in the pan example that I don't think would have been possible had we not set ourselves on that path 2 years ago to experiment, build up the knowledge, distribute the keys to producing this content to our network, and letting them run with it. So that's been our approach, and it's been fun so far.
Great.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Ray and Robert. Last but not least, from New York, Paul Chung with AP Interactive, and I think I know what Paul's going to show, right? But you take it away.
So a lot of people, when they think about virtual reality, they don't necessarily think about the AP, right? AP is like, oh, aren't those people who do tech story and they somehow involved with elections, right? So AP been doing this for the past 170 years. So this year mark our 170 year anniversary.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. And we've been working on every single technology from the Marconi wire to radio to TV to interactive. So therefore, virtual reality is no exception. And what's really interesting is when we think about technology, it comes with a lot of obstacles. This is a real quote from a New York Times review back in 1939 about TV. I don't know what American...
Now you know why we didn't invite the New York Times. I'm sorry, but no, just kidding. Yeah.
I don't know what the Americans were doing back in 1939 that will prevent them from watching TV, but it must be a lot of fun. So as you think each technology kind of present itself to the consumer, for news, we have to think about what is our intersection. So I'm going to talk a little bit about AP's journey into VR. We basically have no idea of what we were doing from the get-go, right? We were presented with a piece of technology, a Matterport camera, and basically this camera scanned 3D space and create 3D models. So when we look at that camera, I'm just like, hey, you know what? Could we make this into a VR experience? And we talked to the camera company, and they say, yeah, I think we could, and we need to take the OBJ files and get programmers to use Unity to make waypoints, and we have to talk to Oculus to develop a app. So that was our foray into VR. We choose basically the hardest things we could do ourselves, not having expertise in Unity, not knowing anything about virtual reality, and definitely didn't know how to work with Oculus, and that was our first project. And what we learned a lot is the fundamentals of storytelling, right? We learn about the limitation of equipment, and it's really important to understand that limitation. And we also begin raising questions on standards and ethics. So the project we did on the first project we called the Sweet Life, where we did 3D scan of 3 luxury places that you could visit. This one of my producer, Nathan, he's scanning the 4-season Taiwanese suite in New York City. The suite costs about $50,000 a night. And when they went in to scan, they have to put like the little special thing for the shoe. And because the throw pillow was like a couple $1,000s, right? And question that raises from the standards editor when we went into the suite, say, does this bucket of champagne, is it meant to be there? Do every single person who went into this suite will get this bucket of champagne, or are they just putting it there for our own, experience? So immediately we begin asking these questions. And the thing with the Taiwanese suite is the bathroom have so many mirrors that there's no way you could have the camera and not see, a person or the camera rig. What do we do? Do we erase it? Do we somehow magically remove it? Do we just put a giant blob AP logo there? We don't know. So we decided to just leave it the way it is, because even though it's virtual reality, it's really our perspective. And along with this experience, we also scanned the Queen Mary, their luxury suite, and also the Singapore airline, the new A380, their first class suite, where if you have 2 people, side by side, could turn into a mini room. And so from there, we also find out from Oculus, what is it they need? And that was really insightful, right? Because we thought hey, we have this experience, we developed Waypoint, you put in your Samsung Gear or Oculus, you could explore the space from point to point. And we realized that we did it too fast and people were getting sick, right? We have to tell the editors, you need to sit down for this one. So we have to slow down the motion from point to point, because we realized that our brain is not really adjusting as fast as we think we're adjusting. And the second thing, Oculus came back and said, we want more content. We're like, well, what do you mean by that? More content, here it is, right? You experience it. They say, we need more context. So we didn't know that we have to put in that much more reporting into the piece. So we work with our business reporter and really start mapping out the story. So we kind of have a lot of insight from just this particular experience. And at that same time, that's when YouTube 360 and Facebook 360 is coming on board. So the second experience we did was also not an easy experience. We partnered up with Riot to create Seeking Home, which is a mini film documenting the refugee crisis in Calais, northern France. Right? That's done with a GoPro with special rig with 6 camera, a lot of stitching, a lot of pre-planning, where we pair an AP journalist with a Riot producer to go examine the piece. And it was about 5 minutes, and we both learned a lot about each other, right? We really gave Riot a run for all of our standards issues. No, we really can't do this. And no, we cannot call this person that. And no, we definitely cannot tell the story this way. But we also get a dose of what is the limitation? How is it that we could push our story forward in this 360 environment? What is it that will compel you to turn to the right, to the left, and behind you? Because I think a lot of times when people put on the 360, It's really super interesting. You look at it to the left and to the right and maybe to the back, like for a split second, and then really what you're focusing on is still what's ahead of you. So that led to our next experience, Star Wars, where we decided that, well, what we learned from Calais was really interesting, but when someone turned their head over, part of the story is missing, right? Like, how do you know what's happening on your left if you're looking on the right, right? We didn't know what to do. So with the Star Wars, we decided to ask the host, Cece, to interact with the audience, to basically tell people, oh, Harrison Ford is coming down. And one of the actors was interacting with the camera, so like, are you feeling me now? Are you touching me? And that was super interesting. We find that that worked better, but we also discovered the world does not operate in a 360 environment. Because with the red carpet, again, when you look to the back, is a bunch of photographers. Not very super interesting, right? And we tried to shoot fashion show. Even look at this panel. It's set up where you're facing us in one direction. There's no reason for you to turn your head to the back, right? We quickly realized that a lot of these stories that we want to do in terms of news does not work in 360. So the question comes back to, why are we doing it? And finally, we decided to work on animation because we have more control. And from animation, we get a sense of the directions, right? How do we compel people to move from one direction to the other direction? And also timing, right? The first experience we did was super long. We don't even know how long people will spend on the Sweet Life. The second experience we did was about 5 minutes. And if you were looking at this at Google Cardboard, like, I'm a really lazy person. Like, I don't think my hands are weak, but like, if you hold the cardboard for 5 minutes, it gets tiring. I mean, your phone is like, what, like maybe half a pound? But like, just holding that like for 5 minutes, turning left and right could be really exhausting. And the red carpet, we decided to do for 2 minutes. And with this animation, we decided to do it in 60 seconds, where we explain the supermoon, how it happened. And we basically tell people, like, follow the moon. So it gives you a reason to follow the moon all the way across and back to Earth. And we decided that that's something there that people are not utilizing enough. So in terms of our path forward, we're actually still experimenting with all the different ways of telling stories. But we really want to think about, in all different aspects, from animations to video to true VR to AR, how do we annotate? And we even talk about best practices, right? So do we need, when we do the video experience, do we need to think about it like a car, right? Like, modern cars, like when you park in the back, you have a little dash cam, you know what's going on so that you don't like hit someone. And then when a car comes too close to your left, like lights start to blink. No, so I'm now to have to think about, do we need to introduce these type of UI into the experience so that people would natively know, oh, something is coming from behind you to your left, so therefore it makes you look to the left. And that's part of the story. So right now we're still discovering a lot and learning a lot. So we're by no means any experts. And we're playing with all different kind of cameras, both high-end and low-end, because we realize that cameras and production will come to a point where it becomes irrelevant. So, but what we need to profess is storytelling. How do we profess, refine the stories that we tell on a day-to-day into this environment? And that's still the big, great unknown for all of us to explore together.
Yeah.
So we produced 9 experiences so far. If you guys are interested, you could go to bigstory.ap.org, VR360, and most of the experience does not require a headset. And that's something that we really want to focus on too, is to think about what is responsive VR 360. How do we provide audience an experience that doesn't require any headset, to a low-level headset like cardboard, to a fancier headset like Gear, to a super fancy headset like, an Oculus Rift. And so a lot of these stuff are still in the works.
Wow, it's great. Excellent overview. I want to take up something that Paul just said, because I think that we all recognize in the industry that, and if you have a filmmaking background, if you've done any work in journalism, you know that the history of this industry has really seen innovation pushed largely from documentarians, early film work, obviously television, radio, but now VR, and even the web to some extent as well. All have, as producers, news organizations, certainly large corporations who were experimenting with VR even 25 years ago, which is when I first got involved in VR. But that was a much more of an exploratory medium and much more driven from the artistic side. But Paul, you just mentioned something about looking at responsive. You know, I want the panel to sort of talk about that, because I think, you know, that one of the biggest things is to break that wall into something that's more auto-stereoscopic. I mean, you know, Ray and Rob and Cam, I mean, are you looking at that as well? And you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That was our final sort of push for the Mars experience. We used a coding language 3JS in order to make our experience work on all mobile devices and all mobile platforms. What was it? The issue with video on iOS devices. It wouldn't play video playback, but it would do image sequences. So. But we wanted to get it to a wider audience. Right. That's the thing. Right. So, you know, the HTCs, number one, the Oculus consumer versions are just coming out. They're just hitting the market. They're just getting to people's houses. I see people posting on Facebook, and it's like, I just got my, you know, Rift, and I ordered it last year, and it's just coming in today. So all that content that we produced, that Oculus wants us to produce, nobody could even view it because they didn't even have a headset of their own, plus they had the developer kit. And we are the only ones.
That's more back to that sort of experimental side of saying, great that your app is in the Oculus Store. How many people have seen it? Whereas something that, you know, if you run something on the Des Moines Register, and maybe, you know, you've got the chops to now know what you could do with a deadline, because, you know, Robert, the working journalist, was on a deadline, came here late, but not so very late. So props to you.
Thank you.
But you know, but that's like the big scary deadline for VR. Are you kidding me? Right? You know,
there's different ways to be responsive. You know, and we've touched on it. We really believe in the importance of the litmus test, you know, and we apply this, I think, to every story type, not just VR.
Right.
But there's a really quickly emerging array of VR experiences. A lot of it's driven by technology limitation or penetration right now, but I think we really firmly believe that it should equally be driven by storytelling choices. And you can be responsive in terms of picking your moments to really go all in and build the big, huge thing, or recognizing that, you know what, this is just better. There's not enough meat on the bones here. This is a great 2-minute 360 video or something. Yeah. Or don't even try for video on this one. We did a thing from the cherry blossoms, and I said, you know what, do it as 360 stills and get some narration and lay it under, because it will be much more beautiful, I think, that way than trying to just capture and shoehorn in video.
But that really, I think, captures the moment. I mean, it's kind of funny. We talk about, you know, where Oculus has gone from being a concept that was suddenly a $2 billion acquisition by Facebook, but Facebook's real sort of anchor right now is Instagram. And I think the reason is really that we live in a post-textual world, not just people under 30. Now, in terms of content, everyone produces and consumes at the same time, contextually as well. So that choice is a contextual choice as much as it is technical, right? Exactly. But this leads me to another thing, because now, you know, this is a moment in time where we have, you know, leaders on the stage in this space, in the journalism space, and experimenting. And my question to you is since you know some comments, Cam, you talked about people were commenting about, you know, well, yes, it's great, I got the Oculus Rift out of the box, but are you finding independent journalists or even students or people who are shooting in VR or really getting into production that way? Is it bubbling up enough?
I mean, I think right now there's a lot of, you know, production houses that's bubbling up, you know, and also a lot of media companies are getting into the space. Partly it's driven because of the mobile market, right? So unlike 3D TV, where like you have to buy this giant TV for a lot of money, like everyone has a phone. So is it so difficult to imagine that the box that your phone come in could be turned into a cardboard, right? Like that could be a really real thing. I mean, McDonald's and Mattel are giving you kids Google Cardboard, right? So like this medium is here to stay, but in terms of the way we think about responsive content, it is a choice, right? It goes to, taking the cherry blossom example, without anything you could have a great picture of the cherry blossom, right? The next iteration is a 360 photo of the cherry blossom at the spot that you're standing, and then And another experience is a 360 video of, the cherry blossom that you are standing, maybe with the wind blowing, you see the blossom, like floating, could be very like thematic. And then the final moment is like you get to choose, like, I don't want to stand in this spot. I want to walk down the cherry blossom.
Right.
That's true VR. So I think, as storyteller, we really want to think about, like, what is the story for each of these medium, and how do we design a workflow that we're not driving ourselves crazy, because the editors will come back, which is like, well, I give you A, and they say, well, what about B and
Well,
C?
that's the other thing. So, we're aware in New York, Prime Focus Technologies has a workflow they've come up with, which is pretty good. But there are tools like Video Stitch and other things that solve this problem. But again, I mean, regardless of how well you plan this, you still have to look at presumably something that's going to be larger in volume. I mean, I think the slide you had, Ray, showed, or Rob, showed 9 sort of, regions or centers for Gannett's network, the USA Today network, right? I could imagine that being 6 times as many in a year or two. So the workflow is, I mean, I think, are you talking to any of these companies specifically, more than just back and forth trial and error, about trying to push, the workflow side?
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of on both ends, because not just the video side, but when you think about the deliveries, we were talking about, from 2D to 360, mobile device, web, and on from there. Because one of the things that we try to do is, even though we have a large network, we don't want to, the concern that Mitch had brought up, bad content. We don't want to treat this as a gimmick. It's such a unique opportunity that we have to decide, we have to make that decision ahead of time. Well, does this story make sense in VR? Okay, if it does, are we going to rely on the photographs? Are we going to make this video? Are we going to create an interactive? And then from there, determining what are our deadlines and can we deliver all this? And are people actually interested in consuming all this content? Right. So it's a very big challenge. And as far as the software solutions for video.
As the gear, as we've touched on, cameras they're evolving so fast. The Theta that we've all mentioned, I mean, it's pretty much an iPhone, the iPhone of 360 in your pocket now. And Nikon's going to release one soon that's basically a 4K version of that. It's very high res. It puts the onus back on us to really inject the storytelling. We've touched on the breaking news, goal in VR. I would put us in the category of an organization that I don't think we've really nailed it yet either.
Right.
We've tried a number of things, but it is very, very hard to run and gun in 360 and VR. It just takes so much pre-production to get it right.
Well, but that's part of the experiment. So Cam was involved with an interesting shoot that was done when Pope Francis was in Juarez.
Right.
So talk about that a little bit, because that was an interesting learning experience.
So went down to Texas to work with some students and sort of train on the stitching and the shooting of the cameras, because we sort of bought a camera, we did a few tests, and then we kind of gave it into the newsroom and let journalists go out and shoot, themselves. And they were coming back and not getting the proper shots, or they weren't holding the camera in the right position in order to stitch it correctly. Right. So we went down there, we sort of trained the University of Texas staff to shoot in Juarez, and then we went to Juarez, Mexico, and shot, and it was very much similar to what you guys were talking about. It was, they were behind gated ropes. They were watching the traffic and all the cars and the
motorcade in
motorcade
360. Cool, yeah.
Right.
No, but it did look cool, yeah.
And no, it was great. It was great. But I think that it did lend to what you guys were saying about, you're looking in one direction and you see the Pope go by, and that was it. And anything behind you're not paying attention to.
Yeah, you see the Fiat, but you can't get it back. No,
right. But another thing that I wanted to touch on really briefly was you guys talking about breaking news stories and sort of picking and choosing your battles. And I think that is something that we at the Washington Post had really spent a lot of time to figure out.
So what do you want to focus on now? I mean, yeah. And Mitch, why don't you jump in here?
So that's a great question. And what we've seen is that different media tell stories better. There is an application for text. There is an application for still photographs and photo galleries and double trucks and Look Magazine and centerfolds in the Daily News. There is an application for audio and sound, for rich media, interactive graphics, for video on demand for live video, and now for a more immersive experiential storytelling experience. And you have to apply the right media to the right story in order to get the best, figure out the best way to communicate that story to the audience. The thing about virtual reality, and as everybody in this panel has talked about, VR is many things right now. The thing about it that's most exciting is that we're not going to figure it out ourselves. As a communications or journalism industry, we're not going to figure this out. We need the film industry to come together and share techniques and knowledge. We need the technologists, the Valley, the hardware manufacturers to come and participate, and we need the advertising and the marketing community to come in as well. This is going to be the most collaborative medium that has ever existed, and that's why when I look around this room and see people like Cutter, a Sundance Award-winning director for Fishing Without Nets, and Andy Zipfel with an agency and an advertising background, and some of the technologists who are in the room who have been working with the hardware that's enabled this medium to come together, that's where places like the Newseum and the Knight Foundation can convene and bring us together and recognize that if this ecosystem is going to grow, if we're going to enable quality content to move into this, we need to work together in order to have that success.
And that's a good jumping off point, because in starting with Paul, you know, I learned AP style, okay, and I still believe in it. Thank you very much. And I have my AP style book, and 170 years of that you know, really grit and that learning. Are we going to see the AP style or different versions of same in VR? Because I think that's what we're talking about here on the stage, right?
Well, I
just pimped you, so make it
well,
good.
It's funny because I met Ray a couple of weeks ago, precisely talking where a lot of us who are in this space now are talking about what is the standards. And the standards can mean a lot of different things, right? I would love to have a standard of motion, right? Like, let's all agree that it will be like 3 seconds because 4 might be too long, 2 just gonna make you vomit. Right. And what is the proper way of annotations? Like, how do you, and you know, is it acceptable to like put a, you know, like, because if you use the Ricoh, you will see a lot of people's head, right? Like, what do you do? Like, do you just leave the head the way it is, or you put a logo, you put a black dot? Like, I would love for the AP and everyone else who's working on it to kind of define some of these standards so that people don't have to figure that part.
You know, it'd be great if we could, you know, maybe create some kind of working standards body and get Mitch and the group here, and maybe, you know, that's something that's sort of like an open API or some kind of standards body. Because one of the things, you know, Ray, you were talking about, the idea of crossing over from gaming. VR has always been sort of in the gamer's domain, even though gamers were really kind of late to it. As I said, you know, I came to this in 1990 and 91, but it was still, you know, this idea that you were bringing gameplay and a knowledge of how to build different levels into this. So now in crossing over, I think that I would hope that you'd have more people who have those chops who are coming into journalism. For those who don't know, Unity is a great interactive platform. We're seeing more and more of it even in mobile, and I think that's fantastic. And if you can find anyone who's versed in developing in Unity, grab them, seriously. And I think that you should all be advertising jobs in your newsrooms and getting the Knight Foundation to pay for Unity developers to come in. Because seriously, we have to kickstart it that way. It's not just going to you know, Activision Blizzard to develop a game. You should be developing great 2-minute journalism pieces with your gamer chops. I think we're going to open it up to questions now. Again, we have, if you have a loud voice, that's great, but we have nice mics here on either side of the house in row 3. But as I said, you feel free to stand up and ask a question, and don't be shy. Yeah. We have one over here. House left, house right.
Yeah, so I noticed, I remember something back in kind of early days of broadband internet with looking at apartments or houses. You could take 360 tours, and that was
that was
over a decade ago.
There was a company called iPix that was doing that, and there was also Cosmos, which was something that Silicon Graphics was doing with Netscape, which was very early web VR, which I'm a huge proponent of. A lot of that sadly died with the dot-com crash. That was a very experimental period, 95, 96, 97. But I cut you off. You had.
Well, yeah, I mean that was a little bit of where I was going. Was basically what happened. There was sort of a mini boom, and then.
It really. I mean, I think that's really what happened. That was an experimental period. Cosmos, which was used mostly by artists. A lot of great experimental work that was being done, and a lot of the artists who are still doing great work in that space today came from that period. We learned a lot, but really sadly, the crash of 2000, 2001 saw a lot of those companies go away. Even in things like streaming audio, there's a lot of great innovation. It'd be interesting, for someone, if you want to take a look at doing a study on all of that, that would be great, because I don't know anyone who's done that piece of history to really tie it together. I asked some of those questions as well, but a lot of those people are still around, and some of them are here.
That's great. We do have one of those people here.
Yeah.
You want to stand up and share a little bit about their success?
Yes.
When
we have Ted Iannuzzi here. Yeah. So Ted was part of a company called Psycor. Yeah, which did a lot of that work. Yeah.
Rendering engine that we developed in Sweden called 3D, and that was actually one of the first applications where you actually had immersive VR in that sense of the word. It was three-dimensional models that were completely interactive and actually had particle systems, so you could see flame, you could see smoke. We even did the unfortunate World Trade accident when it occurred. If any of you remember, if you went to CNN, they actually showed the models in 3D. That was that technology. So that's in 2000, that's many moons ago, but utilizing the same platform, a lot of the Doom engine kind of things, if you remember back in the day, a lot of stuff was done in that, using that platform, and now you've got Unity.
A lot of these cycles got moved into mobile. I think the irony is now that we talk about and a lot of the work that came out of, Gannett Digital, which really started, like 10, 11 years ago. I had a client who built the first website for USA Today, but that was 10 years ago. It seems like a million years ago. Now we're talking about VR on all platforms. So, I think that a lot of that learning comes around, but I think, we're gathering a lot of tribes here tonight, and hopefully, we can really put a lot of that learning together to really create those standards. So, thank you for that. We have a question on this side of the house.
Thanks. That actually fits with my question. Speaking of the Doom engine and 3D geometry, what do you guys think is the future of mapping VR onto 3D geometry? Companies like Matterport or other things are doing like whole rooms or whole houses, whole buildings. Can we make that full motion video? Can we do other things with it?
You heard the question. You want to take that, Ray?
Yeah, it's one of those things where right now with the Matterport and technology similar to that, you could see where they're building towards, and it will get better. Performance-wise, the way that it captures, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at those pieces of geometry within a game engine, but the performance-wise, it's pretty terrible. But it's getting better. When you compare, let's say, folks who use the Xbox Kinect to capture just surfaces and not actually project any textures onto them, okay, it's capturing points. It could be thousands, but then you think Matterport captures possibly tens of thousands, and it's going to get better. Another really good example, and I think Mitch can speak to this, is 8i, which they're doing some fantastic stuff.
Can you say that again?
8i, the number 8, letter I. But they've got a great piece of technology with what they're doing. Essentially what they're doing is capturing, if there's an individual standing around all these cameras and is capturing points, it could create a hologram, in a sense, within VR, so you could walk around an individual that looks real. There are points here and there that's kind of skewing, but you could see where the technology is going.
Yeah, that's a great question.
So 8i is at the cutting edge of that. They have the one studio right now. There's a 6-month backlog simply to get in and do a shoot. at 8i. It's in Culver City. It is a 360-degree green screen with 57 cameras set up around it, along with directional audio capture. And as Ray said, it shoots tens of thousands of points and then provides fully three-dimensional human animations, which you then take and place into a spherical environment that's either captured with a spherical still or put together with a photogrammatic creation of the place that you want to set the scene in. And it's very, very powerful. And as you see the 3 levels of VR moving, or 4 levels from what you can do with a flat spherical video on your phone or the desktop, through the cardboard, through the gear, into the more immersive walk-around environments, this enables you to put real people and real stories, eventually in real time, into environments for a much more immersive VR experience. If anybody's interested in sticking around afterwards, I have a couple of examples of this rendering that I can show you on the Vive. It's pretty remarkable.
It's cool. Thank you for that question.
Yeah, thanks.
Back to House Right, question here.
Yeah, so coming from a background in video production where pretty much at all steps you have editorial control through, you know, which sound bites you're including and what you're framing in the shot and what you're cutting out. I'm wondering if a truly, you know, if we're doing VR right and it's immersive and it's personal and it's really suited for the 360 sphere, are we sort of relinquishing control over the narrative? Has that been a
That's a great question. For those who didn't hear it, are we relinquishing control of the narrative in VR? So I'm going to let Rob take that.
Yes and no. You know, it's really, it just, from what I've found, it kind of flips the production process on its head, you know. You are definitely relinquishing control of certain aspects. For example, I mean, you really think of a 360 camera as your viewer's head, literally. Like when they have a headset on, wherever you put that camera.
If you're a fly, yeah, sorry.
That's where they're gonna feel like they are. And in a 360 scene, you're relinquishing total control to them in terms of what, you know, really their head becomes the camera. In terms of panning and all of that, they're looking wherever they want. But you retain control in some aspects, you know, and I won't go too much into kind of the production techniques of there's lots to get into, but long story short, you can still choose which scenes you present. You know, you can play with editing together montages of scenes, kind of leading a viewer through a narrative. We're still making use of storytelling principles, you know, audio, narration. So you retain a lot of control that way. You're just presenting the story much differently to hopefully leverage the medium. But you definitely get into a host of kind of mind-bending conundrums with how you produce this stuff. But that's what makes it so fun and so challenging.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the curse of death when, you know, for all of us who are in film school is do not have a boom in the shot. Well, here you've got the damn crew in the shot. Okay, in some instances, and there's an editorial decision,
right,
whether it's the Four Seasons or in Calais, leave the crew in the shot, what are you going to do? And maybe that's a hipper choice. So this side of the house is lonely. We're going to stay here. Yep.
Hello, I'm writing my research on digital marketing strategies in the 2016 political campaign. I've read news that currently a lot of candidates have used tech-driven strategies in their political campaign to better communicate with voters and tell their story. So do you think it is cost-effective and valuable for political candidates to apply VR to better tell a good story and communicate with them?
Great question. For those who didn't hear, this young woman is doing her thesis. Is that right?
Yeah.
doing her thesis on the application of technology in the 2016 presidential election. The question is, do we know or do we think it's feasible in a cost-effective way for candidates to apply VR to communicate with voters? It's a jump ball.
Yeah.
Cam, you take it.
Absolutely. I think that if they're trying to reach a specific demographic, a younger demographic, a more tech-savvy demographic, I think using VR is the place for that. I think that's where they would be.
I want the Washington Post VR to convey Lucifer in the flesh in VR. Can you do it?
You might be getting, this might be telling, you might be getting more than you've asked for right now.
Okay, there we go. That's right. Yeah.
The other use for that, a wonderful question, is fundraising. Cam mentioned a company called Riot that was recently acquired by AOL and the Huffington Post. Their mission is to tell stories that get people involved in having impact, contributing time, money, or goods to support the causes that they believe in after coming out of the story. And through a fundraising aspect, they found that when they used VR and brought it to their events, that they more than tripled the amount of fundraising and contributions because of the connection that they were able to make between their audience and their potential donors and the characters, the individual, the people, and the stories that they were telling. So there's a great potential at events and in other areas to use VR in politics or in other areas to drive the empathy and the connection between audience and subject.
At this point, I don't think we know of any campaigns that are using it. CNN, of course, did an earlier debate in 2015 in VR, but great question. Next question.
First of all, thank you for this panel. There's an awful lot of great perspectives, and I really appreciate it. My name's Tim, and I work at a place called Interface over in DuPont Circle. We're currently doing a VR series for the city of DC. It's a sort of a marketing promotion thing, so we've gone out and captured a fair amount of it. We even put a VR rig on a Segway and captured some VR footage. We're stitching it together and putting graphics in it. It's easy to go out and capture, but it's very time-consuming to put this stuff together. It's expensive. So that's what I'm doing currently, but personally, I'm not a cynical guy. I'm sort of a Forrest Gump futurist. So I was
trademark that, Tim. What's your question?
Well, I've seen the experimental holographic stuff that the Polaroid people were doing in 1978. And I've flown over the Silicon Graphics glove-generated defense simulation in 3D with a headset in 1994. So it's actually, this stuff has been around a really long time. The challenge is that what happens to the direction of the content, because the VR by its nature is self-directed. Most of them, I have Discovery VR on the phone and Jaunt VR on the phone. All of those are placing you in the middle of a sequence, and I haven't actually gotten through any of them because after a while, you just stop doing it.
So you're saying, is there a way to bring some more closure editorially to VR?
How do you introduce direction to the content in VR, because it's a self-directed medium?
We have the experts here and take the answer. Paul, why don't you take that first?
I mean, for example, when we did this supermoon animation, we tell people follow the moon, right? So you don't have to follow the moon, but we're telling you if you want to maximize this experience, you should. And I think that's where all of us are still trying to navigate. How do we put some of these common technique when we tell a story? Like, for example, the classic TikTok, right? Like, how do we create a sequence of event? Like, what does that look like in VR? But in VR, you also have to account for people doesn't have to do it the way you wanted to do it, right? And you just have to figure out what are some of the other side story that might be happening that, is intentional. So you do have to spend a lot of time in your editing, because do the editing and do your capturing, reviewing it, you might realize that, there's different components of story that's going on. And I think all of us are trying to figure out what is the elegant way of navigating you back to the story. And I would say there is no, I haven't seen anyone come up with a
Cam,
perfect
with
solution.
the Mars, talk about it.
So yeah, actually on Mars, I was going to say, as the engineer, I'm coming from the engineer standpoint. So clearly there was a senior producer or not senior producer, a managing editor that wanted to do the same thing that you're talking about. And one of my quick solutions was line on the ground, like a path on the ground that you can see that you'll follow. And as you walk on this line, you'll hit interactive points. Another thing I would think would be, closing things off. I'm actually playing video games again because I'm building video games, and I want to see how the more recent ones are dealing with some of the issues that you're bringing up. So I build a closed-off room like this and only give you one exit, and you'd have to go through that exit, and you get information in that exit, and until you got that information, you can't go out any other exit. But then I'm trapping you, and you're only allowed to go and have one experience, and there's no more choice. And that's the thing about VR, is having the choice. But those are that is the the devil you know and the devil you don't, and that's the battle that we fight. Giving you too much choice or giving you no choice at all.
I think that's the biggest challenge because it's self-directed
Definitely is.
medium.
Thanks for the question. We're going to House Left.
Good evening. I look up here and I see the potential of VR to really tell, share information and with engaging stories in a way we haven't before. But I also look up at all of you and I see nothing but men, and and I think about what is the potential of VR in terms of closing the digital divide for women, for people of color, for low access communities. Or, is it going to bridge the digital divide, or is it going to make that gap wider? And what are your thoughts on that?
Great question for those who didn't hear. Can VR help break the digital divide and increase opportunities for women, minorities, provide greater access as opposed to creating a greater gulf?
I just want to throw this out there. None of this would have been possible without Nani De La Peña. She started everything. So there is an opportunity to bridge that gap. And Paul and I, we were up in New York City a couple weeks ago, meeting with other colleagues, and I'd say over half of them were women. It's one of those things where this panel just happens to have all males. But
Molly Swenson is the COO of Riot in LA, and we did reach out to her, but we face this in all technology panels. Shame on me, produced a panel on Tuesday for the Producers Guild in New York, and the 13 women I had reached out to, none could be there. So sometimes you whiff, but I think,
I'd love to say that we recently just got a new hire at the Washington Post, wonderful developer. She's amazing. I'd love it if she was interested in VR, but she might not be interested in VR. But believe me, I'm doing my best to bring her over to the dark side.
Thank you for that question.
In addition to not, I actually think right now, at least in this very tiny community of VR people I know, I find it surprisingly a high ratio of people of color, which to me is just really shocking, right? Like even in this panel.
But it doesn't shock me, and I'll tell you why. Because I've been around the game space for a long time. Not that I'm a quote unquote gamer. I've produced some games. I've been around it a long time. And I think that that gets to the question, from my perspective, the digital divide, the breakdown or democratization over the last few decades has been in the game space. At least what people, whether they could afford the latest Xbox or whatever, but I think that has really helped break things down. And also interactive programs at universities. I think that's really, really helped. And I think it's opened the door for this. I would like to believe if you look at Mitch's numbers from his presentation, and I think they're great, but I also think they're almost conservative, and I'm optimistic in saying they're conservative. I would like to believe that as the industry grows, you will have, that will be the answer to your question. So I'm optimistic.
And I want to thank you for the question. In addition to Nani and Molly, I guess who couldn't be here today, Gabby Derbyshire from Framestore is a leading thinker in this medium. And I want to look at the medium itself, because the question is, can the medium change perspective and bridge a divide? One of the best stories that's been told in VR places a camera in a wheelchair and moves you through the scene and a narrative flow in which you, because you are the camera, are seeing the world through the eyes of somebody who can't speak, can't walk, and is paralyzed. And you observe how the world appears to and reacts to her in this case. So you can, when I talk about perspective and the value of using this medium to provide perspective, there may be opportunities to break down walls, put people into others' shoes, and experience the world in a way that I can't experience it through my own personal frame of reference. So the potential is there. Again, will the storytelling rise to the level and meet the potential?
Great. Question over here, house right.
Hi, my name is Elisa Katz with Cortina Productions. I want to thank you all for being here so much. I saw the piece with the wheelchair at ETC. Is that what you're talking about? Fantastic. I have so many questions. The one I'll limit it to is you mentioned AR as well, and with the role of VR being about presence and perspective, at the end of the day, it's the physicality, right? It's me being able to not just see there's a microphone, but reach out and hold it. So whether you're dealing with the VR, goggles and then a physical space mocked up, which I know is also in the works, but also the augmented reality opportunity of relating these amazing news stories to where people stand right here and now, and what that juxtaposition might look like. Is there anything going on like that we can look towards?
So the question is really, can we talk about AR, augmented reality, in the journalism space? Go ahead.
Yeah, so I feel like a long time ago, Ray, we may have had this conversation. I feel like it was you that AR is kind of where this is going to end up going in the future. I think VR is almost at the top of the ladder. But because you asked about the AR space and if there's anything going on, there's a journalist, his name is Dan Archer. He came through the Washington Post to work with us, and he's been working on criminal cases in the public and the media that could utilize this space. So I think he did Ferguson, the trials, as a virtual reality piece, and he was doing the Freddie Gray trial, augmented reality in Baltimore. And I think it's how it works is you see the story and it has the markers for you, and as you swipe through each of these markers, it shows you sort of what happened based on grand jury testimony and based on the facts that we have in police reports to Freddie Gray, and it shows you physical models, actual 3D models of them posed. They're all still. It shows you the van, the police van, and him getting put into it, and you don't see anything inside of the van. We can't ascertain any kind of data or information, about that because we don't know what those facts are. No one does. But that is something that that is in the works and is being published as we speak.
Really cool. But also, Washington Post and I believe USA Today use ThingLink, right? Yeah. So I mean, that's a little bit of an AR-based web tool. That's a Finnish company we know very well. Has really helped create more interactive hotspots for photos, for stories that are enhanced. So that's a great question, and we look forward to more of that. Two more questions, house left and house right, over here.
I just wanted to pick up on what you guys were talking about as far as the standards go and developing standards. When I hear that, coming from a production background, it sounds much more like the need to develop a language of VR. Over the past couple of weeks out at NAB here, I've seen a lot of VR, and what I'm seeing is things like the camera is placed in the wrong spot, or the lighting is wrong, things like that. The things that we've been able to work out in cinema, in video over the past 100 years, that really through the fits and starts of VR, we haven't been able to figure that out yet. And I think that one of the things that we'll see, and I would put that to the panel, is that we're going to find VR pioneers like yourselves and other people in this room who are going to help develop that language of VR. And I'll just
so the question is really, are we getting to the articulation of a quote-unquote language of VR? And as Brian was really pointing out, there are fits and starts, particularly coming from technology companies. If anyone has seen Ozo, Nokia's camera, which was alluded to by Mitch earlier, They have an interesting sort of workflow that shows 2D and 3D images. But you know, and there are some other esteemed companies like Fraunhofer who have some great technologies. But this is all leading to the question. So, I mean, are you looking to develop that? I mean, does that make sense for you as a producer, as an editor?
We build it internally with ourselves, with what we've learned and what we, you know, things that we've failed, and it's like, okay, we have to do this, you know, better. But what I really love about working within this industry and, you know, with these colleagues up here is this is it's the most collaborative medium I've ever worked in. It's very much open source. It's every time we get together, it's what have you learned? Have you shot this? What did you think of that? Blah, blah, blah. Because it's one of those things where I can't define this on my own, but we learn from each other and we're building this up.
Do you have any sort of meetups or blogs or you know, sort of places that you're going?
We have blogs, but to give you, you know, conferences are great. I went to the Game Developers Conference this year and last year, and I run into the same, you know, folks from the gaming industry, and they're even interested in you know, like video and storytelling, and we're just kind of learning together, which is great.
Yeah,
and that's something, Chris, that I know you've talked to the Knight Foundation a little bit about as well. Right. That there's going to be a concerted effort to bring people together, to have convenings, to learn together. As Ray was saying, the one thing that we all have in common right now is we really don't know what we're doing.
But doing it so beautifully.
That's right. And we've made enough mistakes to be able to share those with our colleagues so that we don't have to repeat each other's mistakes.
And this is not, and again, this actually goes to the question about breaking the digital divide. This is not like an organization. So the Producers Guild 7 years ago had brought together an incredible group of cinematographers with the association, the American Society of Cinematographers, the ASC, to create the first camera assessment series. And it was shot on the Paramount lot, and it was, you know, just amazing to get all these people together. By the time the report came out, it was practically obsolete, which wasn't entirely true, but it was this Herculean effort to say, let's try and codify with all the new digital cameras some standard practices. And then they went back 2 years later and did a workflow assessment, which was mind-bogglingly, you know, hard to grab onto, and some good people, particularly at Warner Brothers, helped do that work. I think this is much easier to do in a large part because you know, we're not talking about cameras that are as expensive as Ozo, and some of you may have seen in the trades that Ozo cut a deal with Disney to really help them figure out what we're all talking about here for their Marvel, Pixar, and other films, even Lucasfilm. So it's a great question. Last one, and make it a good one. House right.
There's been a lot of talk of VR as a self-directed medium. It seems to me that that's optional. We've got well over 2,000 years of experience in directing people's attention. I've directed plays on large stages where you spend a lot of your time getting the audience to look there or to look over there. And it's often pretty easy, like especially if you have 360 sound. If I hear a door slam over there, I'm going to look over there. Even if I want to look there, I'm going to look over there.
So I think that's a great one to end on, and thank you for that. Panelists, talk about the issue of being able to direct your audience in VR.
Tell linear stories rather than nonlinear stories, because linear stories are easier to tell, and do them directing people's attention rather than playing so much with this other aspect, which becomes amorphous and much more difficult to deal with.
It's back to your door. Yeah.
I think there is a lot of that going on. I mean, there's two basic classes of VR. There's passive, and there's interactive. The question for us, just to kind of focus that in on more journalistic applications, is how much of that leading around is okay, you know? A big part of the power of VR, of the presence, and I think of the storytelling potential is it's power and it's a challenge. It's you are able to really give your audience a transparent look at a situation or a story. There is a host of things you can do, as you say, to lead people along in terms of framing. You know, even in a 360 shot, you're still framing the scene when you can. And in terms of more passive VR, there's a lot that you can play with there, absolutely. And there are still a lot of traditional storytelling applications that we apply. But as I said, the question for journalism is really where do you draw that line? Where does it become, where does it stop being journalism and start being something that you're staging?
Yeah, I mean, I want to separate when we talk about standards and practice. There's best practice and there's ethical issues, right? If you were to direct people, like sometimes news you can't direct, it happens. You know, it happens in all different directions. It happens around you. It just so happened the reporter captured this and the photographer captured that. I mean, I think the fundamental question is, if we're doing all of that, then like, do we really need to do it in VR? Like, why not just do it the way we've been doing this? It's still a very enjoyable experience. So I think we have to go a little bit more like deeper. It's like, why do we need to tell the story in this environment versus, you know, the other environment?
Right, right. No, I think that's huge. I think at the beginning everybody did a really good job of introducing themselves and telling a little bit of their background, and I kind of jumped into being at the Post. And the only reason I bring that up now is I'm a real ad man, and I was in the film industry in Los Angeles before I came out here. So I've actually had these conversations at that level with, we should stage this, like if we made this happen. And again, we've answered it perfectly. It's not ethical. It's not part of the story. It's not factual. It didn't really happen. We made it happen so that it could be a better experience for you, and that's not appropriate in this medium.
And to your point, so at the event where I met Jeff and Scott Williams, at the Knight Foundation event at South by Southwest, Randall Kleiser, who I've known for a number of years, who's most famous for being the director of Grease, has something that he worked on with the Sundance Institute that was at the Sundance Festival, which is, again, point of view of a woman who was cryogenically frozen in LA in 2015, and then 30 years later is thawed because they have a cure. She had a stroke, and Carl Weathers and Bruce Davison are in it. And I mean, this is about as directorial a piece of VR you're going to see. It's episodic. You know, I mean, that's a director's choice. And you, as the viewer, okay, it works. So I think there are a lot of things that, you know, particularly from theater, in terms of whether you want to break the fourth wall or you want to use different cues. You know, I would say if anyone, you know, here knows anyone who's doing any theater work, get them into VR and experimenting, because these people need to benefit from that experience as well, because you're dealing with a live audience. And they may be pushing out something from the Iowa caucuses in 2020, or maybe they won't do them anymore. I don't, just kidding. But I mean, those are serious discussions that most traditional TV producers don't have, or it's been forced out of them. So thank you for that. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for coming here. I want to thank not only the Newseum, Jeff Hertz, Kathy Trost, Scott Williams, Jake, but Mitch Gelman. Give it up for Mitch Gelman. And you'll be seeing him around these halls soon. Cam Blake from the Washington Post. The Robin Ray Show, Ray Santos and Rob Padovic from Gannett, USA Today. Last but not least, from New York, Paul Chung with AP Interactive.
Live from New York.
Producers Guild of America. We're still here, so please bombard us with your questions. I think there's still some battery life in some of those devices if you didn't get a VR experience. Thank you for coming.
Great job.